I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
All right. So welcome, folks. You're seeing me in a little bit of a different background because I'm doing a day trip with my friends in the grill. But that's not what is most important for us to be talking about. You brought up this topic of American exceptionalism, and I really want to know where that comes from and what you're thinking about it, because as soon as you said it to me, I got really very excited about what we could talk about in regards to American exceptionalism, especially because I'm on this island and like the things that we talk about in regards to U.S. territory. So
yeah. I even hesitated American exception because you're helping me reconceptualize using the term American to speak about the U.S. But that's a phrase that I've heard several folks use, and so for the purposes of this conversation, I think calling it American exceptionalism sort of works, but just wanted to put in that caveat that we're trying not to just say American and have it only be about the U.S. territory. But the reason that was coming up for me, hello, glad to see you, and very jealous of where you are. It's a very gray and rainy day where I am, so I am loving the vibe that's coming from
the vibes. There it is. Yeah,
taking it in.
No jealousy, no envy, just sending love and vibes.
Just loving the vibes. So the reason this came up for me was on this past Friday, I went to a town hall for my senator, Senator Chris Murphy, who is one of the senators from Connecticut, where I live. And so I got an opportunity to go to this town hall, and it's funny because I almost didn't go. I couldn't. I was trying to rally some of my comrades in working for solidarity with Palestine, trying to see if anybody wanted to go with me, and everybody was busy. It was on a work day, and so I ended up going by myself and proudly wore my keffiyeh. I was the only one there with one on. There were 1,800 people there.
Wow.
Yeah, it was well attended. Most of the people, if I were to kind of try to sum it up and categorize, most of the people were there that were supporters of Murphy, that were very democratic, loving, mostly white. I think I saw 3 people of color or 3 people that were non-white in the audience. I didn't take a full scan, but mostly white people. And we are in Connecticut after all. But we were in Stamford, which is kind of the biggest city closest to the New York line. So when you're driving on 95 going to New York City, Stamford is like the last big city. They call it Little New York. A lot of people live in Stamford that don't want to live in the city but commute in. So it's a bit of that vibe. It's like it's New York City adjacent in terms of its groupings. And then what else do I want to say? Oh, there were some the MAGA folks there wearing their red hats. They came in with signage to put out by the line that said Chris Murphy must go. I don't necessarily disagree with that sentiment. And so had some conversation with people in the line about, why I was there. And one white woman that was standing near me, dressed to the nines. She had her hair done and I don't know. I stereotypically would not have expected her to be so jazzed about what the hell is going on and how do we stop this. And so, but the sentiments I was trying to get, one gentleman looked at me and he knew I was wearing a Palestinian keffiyeh, and he said, "So what about the Palestine thing gets you the most upset?" And I thought, well, that question is a little bit odd. So right off the bat, I kind of knew where he was coming from. What about the Palestine thing? Oh, well, I don't know. Maybe genocide. Maybe
many people, entire community and culture.
Bombing and sniping babies to death. I don't know. So the conversation in line was very bizarre. I didn't quite know how to. I was just like, I couldn't even I invite you to explore a couple of times.
Yes.
It's like I couldn't even drum up the I'm curious because it was just so it was classic,
Mm,
as I've experienced it, classic white, uh,
yeah.
liberal Democrat positioning
Mhm.
where they believe that Trump is the measure of all ills.
Yeah.
And, and so I kind of knew what Tommy was in the line. So then we get inside, and the reason American expressionism came up for me was when Murphy first came out and did his little speech before he started the town hall and started taking questions.
Mhm.
The beginning of his speech and pretty much all the way through was all about American exceptionalism. He came
Oh.
out the gate with this is the greatest country in the world, and we have to fight for our democracy, of which it's not a democracy, and we have to, so the tropes were very thick in rah rah sis boom bah, America is the greatest, and don't we want to fight for that? And it's been ruminating in my mind ever since then because I bristle even at that in that grouping of words, American exceptionalism. So that's why I thought it might be a good topic. That's the context with which it came up for me this past weekend, and I thought we could explore why we should give a fuck about that trope, about where it maybe comes from and why and how it manifests in today's lexicon and thought process. The majority of the white people that were there, the majority of the libs that were there, were worried about Trump, worried about him destroying our democracy, of which we don't need to have one. And
Mhm.
we're really talking about myself and one other person were the only ones that mentioned Palestine. Murphy is a Zionist, and he reiterated and stood on that hill again when someone brought it up. So, anyway,
Mhm.
I'll stop talking. I'm curious what you heard out of all of that and what resonates with you.
Well, I love the storytelling of how you got to this place of having this conversation about American exceptionalism. And, just to reiterate, just even in calling it American exceptionalism in the way that you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
We discount the fact that there is an entire continent, South America, and those folks don't call themselves, they're national to the country and the land that they're on, but they don't call themselves American. I know that we're the United States of America, but it is like a real misnomer that folks are US citizens, and folks should understand that because America is two continents. So I just wanted to really reiterate the point that you were making.
Yes.
But that speaks to what exceptionalism is, right? This idea that you can inhabit a continent and then be like, I'm calling it this, and we then are Americans, and that is the culture that we're putting forth, right? This American culture, and the component of exceptionalism in that, thinking that our the United States is a bigger, stronger, better nation.
Mm-hmm.
And that made sense maybe a long time ago when the United States was existing as a bigger, stronger, better nation.
Right.
But I'm watching the US implode on itself, not only socially, but politically. We already know economically people are struggling unless you're a part of the upper echelons of this huge wealth gap that is existing. And so I am curious to go back and just you and I have a conversation about what makes something exceptional, right? To be able to identify it as exceptionalism within the context of our small relationships that we have, but then in this global context of what would be considered something that is exceptional today. And is there any nation that is existing right now? I think all nations right now are claiming this kind of exceptionalism about their culture and what they're producing. I'm curious about that. The larger nations that have more economics and resources and maybe a larger population. And I'd be curious about what that looks like for seriously overpopulated nations of people and where they feel whether or not they feel that there's some type of exceptionalism. And not only to do that, to compare it to the United States so that we can, if we're looking at how we're defining what makes something exceptional, what countries would call themselves exceptional, and then have that comparison, to this American exceptionalism. And I think back to some of the times when I've come to Jamaica and going into the schools and talking to the young people, and I always go to the young people and students, which is really interesting because education, our educational institutions are the place where we create the fabric of our cultures, right? We're teaching our young people the history, we're teaching them how to socialize, we're teaching them what is the expectation to come to work, and the knowledge base that we are hoping that people have. And so when I'm here on the land of wood and water and on the island of Jamaica and going into schools, and the young people are like, oh, but the United States has this, and oh, but the United States has that. And I'm like, yeah, but you have discipline, you have knowledge, you're doing work at a much higher quality than the young people your age in classrooms. Mm-hmm. Your level of just like etiquette and respect, only because I'm an adult human. So thinking about that as being a part of what we talk about when we're talking about exceptionalism, we're talking about people being prepared to experience other people in the world and then increase themselves. That's something that I would consider to be a part of exceptionalism. I don't think that folks in the United States do that very well, because there's this idea and this understanding that we are better than all things. And what I'm watching in the US by my observation and analysis is that the we are better is returning to a very strong white nation state, so that then the white nation can be in this power hold and maintain the positionality that it had before, and that still be the model of the world. But what we're seeing across the world, across the globe, that's not the case, right? So like even the folks in the African Union are starting to come together under Traore, and everyone is joining and seeing what the power of the resources there, and kicking folks out. We see what's happening in Europe, and how people are, Russians are advancing on the Ukraine. We see the proliferation of that, like going out into African countries, like in the Congo and things like that, where folks are recognizing that they can hold their own power and exceptionalism. Yeah. And so it's going to be very interesting to compare that to what the US is trying to rebuild, because I don't think the US is at a place where it actually can call itself an exceptional country. And I don't think that folks in the US would say that, because everybody is saying that we are going to hell. With, like it's imploding on itself. We have all of these social problems. We have all of these economic problems. We have our huge wealth gap. And now we also have leadership that is taking away all of our major institutions that held the fabric of what American culture looked like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The thing that comes up for me, and what I was thinking of in terms when I was at the town hall, was when you think you've already attained this goal, then there's no reason to try to reach to better yourself, right? And I feel like the US and the narrative and the trope around this country has maybe always been, I don't know for sure, but it feels like always been, since the initial genocides of the indigenous people when my ancestors came and colonized this space. There, we automatically okay, so we took care of the savages, we got rid of them, excuse that term, but that was what they called them back then, the indigenous folks. And so now we are exceptional, right? We have created this new world, this government, and it is exceptional. So it's like the goal was already met. And so we think about now with the breakdown of empire and the things that Trump and his administration are trying to further suppress. It's been suppressed all along in terms of not teaching the truth in our schools, in terms of the United Daughters of the Confederacy after the Civil War commandeering the narrative in the textbooks, so that we would have generation after generation after generation of people thinking it was the war of northern aggression and that the South actually won. You heard that? You heard that? The wall of northern aggression. This is everything old is new again, right? We've been doing this since the beginning, since the inception of this colonized land. And so, but Trump is taking it up an even higher notch. And so we're seeing right now. I was just listening to a professor of Yale at Yale, Jason Stanley, I believe his name is, and he is leaving. He and two other professors that teach at Yale are leaving the United States to go to Toronto to teach there. And they're doing it because, or the narrative that they're putting out and the story that they're telling about why they're leaving is because of the intentional breakdown of liberal colleges and universities and the intentional oppression of the truth of what's being taught at these schools, and how the Trump administration is putting pressure onto these. Columbia has succumbed to the pressure that the administration put on them. And, we've seen students who have the right to be in this country or who are here either student visas or permanent residents of the United States have been disappeared. 3 or 4 that I know of just in the past couple of weeks. And they're gone, and they're gone because they wrote an op-ed. They co-authored an op-ed in their student newspaper about what was happening in Palestine and the U.S. Culpability for what's happening there because of the weapons and the money that we're giving Israel to complete the genocide. And she's gone now. She was a Tufts grad student, and we saw a video of her getting swarmed by 6 to 8 plainclothes supposedly ICE agents. And she got swept up and she's gone. And they believe that she's down in Louisiana, same with where Mahmoud Khalil is. But she's not being allowed, her lawyers are not allowed to have any contact with her, and we're not even really sure where she is. And all she did was co-author an op-ed with her First Amendment right to speak about what was happening in Palestine. So that's what comes up for me when you're talking about exceptionalism. And that's what I heard in Murphy's statements and throughout his answering of questions. He continuously separated himself from the elites. He kept referring to the white, and he even talked about white male elites ruling the Congress, the US Congress as it stands right now, and the White House. But he separated himself from it. And I screamed out a couple of times, Free Palestine. I screamed out that he was a Zionist when he was talking about October 7th and all the things that, that Israel needs to be allowed to do. But I thought it was so curious, and I thought it was in the same thread as this concept of American exceptionalism, that he refused to say we when he talked about the white male elites that were running the Congress. And I'm like, you're one of them. Have you looked in a mirror lately? So to me, that is, I don't know if that answers or responds to the question that you put into the space, but to me, that is a similar issue that we are trained not to speak in we statements when we talk about how broken or how messed up this country is. It's not broken. It's operating as it was designed. Anyway, that was what came up for me in listening to what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay, so like a couple of things have gotten interesting to me in this conversation now. So one, the we versus the I, right? Because
the we versus the they.
right. The we, they, I's, and thems, right? And so like it really is a conversation about how it is that you're identifying yourself when you don't want to be identified with the thing that you are calling out.
Right.
Even is yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So like this conversation that you and I used to have about racism and like being like cussing your mother out if you're calling a white person, or cussing somebody's mother out if you're calling a white person a racist.
Right.
In the same way with this exceptionalism piece, and white male identified humans being the ones who are back in power in the United States, in the way that when this country was being created, there was the same power, right? And then also not just the same level of power, but the same ideology, like returning to this space where the privilege and all of the decision making is placed in the hands of white males and what is most comfortable for them.
Right.
The way that they operate their families, the way that they operate their businesses, the way that social structures are operated, and the ones that are not working for them, we are watching them be completely dismantled, right? In the way, in the language that we've been asking for these institutions to be dismantled, right? Very interesting to watch the other side be unhappy with how the institutions have evolved. And so now not liking the way that they work, having the power and the resources to completely dismantle them in the same way that they've been called for for marginalized communities to dismantle these institutions. They're just dismantling them for reasons that we would hope they wouldn't. So we got to get on the same page. Or at least we got to dismantling the institutions, right? And I always back to what you said. When Donald Trump comes into office, things are going to get shaken up the way that they need to get shaken up. But
they
now
need to be shaken up, right?
Come on, they need to be rebuilt in a way, though, that is more advantageous for a larger group of people. And that's the thing that we're not seeing happen.
And what's frustrating for me is that folks like Murphy, who kind of who touts himself or frames himself as being this change maker and this change agent, doesn't see how so much of the time that he spent answering questions, he spent reminding people that the Dems have no control. They have no authority. They have, they don't have a majority in the House or the Senate, and they don't have the White House, and they don't have the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. And so he kept saying, I don't have an army. He kept saying, he was talking about how powerful we are and how powerful white male elites are, which he is one. And yet he was separating himself from that and saying that he was a victim, that he was powerless, that he didn't have the ability to make any changes. I asked my question first. When he said it was time for questions, I jumped up and got in the front in line. And I asked him about, I talked about the students that were being disappeared because of their First Amendment speech. And what was he going to do about it? And he started bloviating about how horrible it was that these students were getting swept up and there was First Amendment rights and all that. And I said, yes, but what are you going to do? I already laid out why this was horrible and everybody here knows this is horrible, but what are you going to do? Because it's amazing to me how whiteness will do that, how it will go in and say, we are exceptional. We are the most powerful. We are the most benevolent. We are the most wonderful. And yet we are the biggest victims. We are the most powerless. We are not. It's like, you can't have it both ways. And yet,
but you can.
And yet we do time and time again. Yeah.
And all the rules get changed and made up according to what it is.
Right.
That whiteness needs to feel comfortable. But we're just seeing it in a way. We're seeing it in a way that's different today, and we're also seeing the impact because we have the opportunity to communicate with each other and to share information. But even in that sharing of information, still, when whiteness has decided that it's something that doesn't serve them,
right?
It's still like being dealt with in the same way that makes white people empower, white males empower comfortable. And so that when we're again now, let's going back to this thought process about what exceptionalism is.
Yeah.
And being the standard and being better when you are actually making the decisions to change your institutions and to change your social fabric or to return it to something that you think was this North Star of standards of behavior. That in and of itself, that you're trying to get back or be different, shows that you are not
exceptional
at all. And it goes back to this one. I love this. There is a movie and they asked a professor who's it's like set in an Ivy League situation, and they asked a speaker that they brought on.
Yes,
can you say, you know exactly right. And the question, can you say why America is the greatest country in the world? And then the person stops and they begin to speak on the realities of the United States. And I think that there are some real alignment and similarities with being able to name the realities of the nation that you're in, the harm that is being created, the amount of people that don't have the resources that they need, the level of education that is not on par with other countries, the social fabric where we're not taking care of our elders, making sure the healthcare is there, making sure that the abundance of food is on people's table, that the abundance of housing is not filled with people that are in need. Like, you cannot consider yourself an exceptional country if you are not taking care of your own. But not taking care of your own and defining your own as those who are on your land, right? Not your own as people who you are determining is, a U.S. citizen or are U.S. citizens, but more who's on your land. Can you take care of your people, especially when you are a superpower that has an abundance of resource.
Right.
Because I'm on a land where, yeah, there's need and there's poverty here.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also an abundance of resource and a sharing of resource when it's necessary. You know what I mean? Like, if bananas are growing on a tree that doesn't belong to somebody and the bananas are there, they're going to get cut down and shared. You know what I mean? So that at least there's food. We don't see that same type of thing in the US, but our production is different in the US. But when we're speaking about those things and thinking about what exceptionalism is, I'm really calling us in to think about what the most important values in humanity are to determine that you are an exceptional nation, not just having a lot of wealth and a lot of bullying power and creating harm across the world.
And it starts with all of us that are of the privileged culture naming and claiming what our part in what we're doing, and you know, so to back to the town hall, I wish that Murphy would have had the courage to say we and us when he was talking about the elite male dominance that were in charge of the Senate, because it was like you are one of them, and you can't change what you're not willing to acknowledge and not willing to speak into. And so, you know, he talked about, somebody brought up that we were turning into an oligarchy. And I'm like, we've been an oligarchy since the beginning. That's not new. You know, you're just now noticing it because you've been told all your lives that this is a democracy when it in fact is not. And so, and Murphy went along with that premise. He didn't push back and say, well, actually, we already are an oligarchy. I mean, the the best conversations that I've listened to in poetry and things like that are talking about that this nation, there was an intention set for dominance, but it was also set for just the logistics of putting together how this government works with the Senate and the House, and the difference between the three branches and the checks and balances that they put in place, and the Supreme Court and how that works. All flawed, all flawed. I'm not saying they're not, but they also have, when they work together correctly, they do have it was an ingenious way to put something together out of nothing. They took, you know, different ideas that were in different countries, and they decided that let's do this, let's try this. And it's been 250 years. And yes, horrifically and inherently flawed, but only because we will not claim the reality of where our shortcomings are. If we were willing to find those shortcomings and define them and say them out loud and own them, then we could say, okay, let's change that. And the sense of resistance to claiming the dysfunction of what is happening, or the not even dysfunction, because that suggests it's broken, the lack of unity and collective nature of how our current systems work is the blind spot that I want to encourage anybody who thinks that this is an exceptional nation. You know, we are the ones that have all so much poverty, so much hunger, so much homelessness, so much, you know, so much crime, so much violent crime, so much, you know, mass shootings. All of these things do not happen in an exceptional nation, you know, to the level that they do here. So yeah, it's just such a misnomer. And yeah, that was what was on my heart to talk
I
about.
agree with you, because I think that it's predominantly white males who are still trying to say that the United States is an exceptional nation.
No, white women are pretty good at it too.
I mean, you can only speak on your people. I don't know.
I'm speaking about people. White women are really good at it, really good at it, and good at ignoring the fact that we have all of this. You know, we buy into that. We are the victims of the patriarchy so easily. It's pathetic, but yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, and that is the reality of who is determining that it is an exceptional nation, because I'm on an entirely different island nation, and the United States is valued for the wealth of resources and product, but not as a nation with a strong social fabric, or that has any type of real importance anymore. It's like there's language out here that I'm going to say, but the United States isn't all of the fuckery. And that is what it is, right? They're not real. It's not real, but it's definitely riding on fuckery. Whereas the United States was a place at a time where people kind of held in value, and that value has completely eroded across the globe. And I do hope that we are able to continue this conversation and talk about, you know, this erosion of American exceptionalism, because there's so many places that we can talk about how that is looking across the globe.
And we will survive. We will come out stronger for it if we can just drop the pretense and drop the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm going to really look in the mirror at this country, and I'm going to really be honest about what I see, you know. And even with the people that I encountered in the line before we even went into the town hall, they were just all a flurry about how horrible everything was. But it was only because it was impacting them finally in a moment when they're swirling in privilege and are clueless to the, you know, don't want to admit that they've been blind to it all this time. And so it, you know, for anybody listening, it's okay. It's never too late. It's never too late to pay attention to what you really are seeing and just say, you know what, if we're going to make this any better, we've got to own it first. So
the first step is acknowledging, eh? Let's no, we can put the United States on a 12-step program.
You got to admit that you got a problem first. You got to admit that you got a problem first.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.